Welcome to Beyond the Bell, Leading with Purpose. This podcast flows from the heart of LiftED, our commitment to supporting school leaders through sustained coaching, systems thinking, and practical development over time. We believe meaningful change doesn't come from quick fixes, but from walking alongside districts as they build strong, aligned systems that serve students and staff well. Today's episode is part of an ongoing series where we'll periodically spotlight our LiftED associates, educators and leaders who bring deep experience, a practitioner's lens, and a passion for doing the work the right way. In this conversation, you'll hear from Dr. Amanda Boyer, a LiftED associate whose background spans special education leadership, early childhood, co-teaching, and behavior systems. Dr. Boyer brings a grounded, systems-focused approach to helping districts strengthen Tier 1 instruction, inclusive practices, and supports that last.
Welcome to Beyond the Bell, Leading with Purpose, a LiftED sponsored podcast designed to bring encouragement and support to leaders by sharing real stories of leadership in action. I'm Nathan Manley, joined by my co-host today, Jim Cummins. How are you doing today, Dr. Cummins?
Doing well. Getting ready to go to Jeff City today to do some committee work up there, and excited about some of the things that we're working on with LiftED, and excited to have Dr. Boyer on the call.
Thank you.
When Jim and I founded LiftED, our goal was to support leaders through sustained coaching, systems thinking, and practical development. Beyond the Bell flows from that same heart, creating space for educators to reflect, learn, and be encouraged as they lead with purpose. And so what we're going to do every so often, we're going to start spotlighting the LiftED associates. We are just blessed throughout this journey that we have had to have some great minds along with us. And so we want to highlight. Our goal is for you to get to know who they are, hear their heart for their work, and walk away with practical strategies you can put into practice right away. Jim, would you add anything to that?
No, we have such depth of associates in the areas that they can help with, and so it's excited to get to share their backgrounds, their stories, and just more opportunities for folks to learn from these educators, leaders that have been doing it, having success in the classrooms in their buildings with their teams. And so I'm excited about this part of our podcast.
So today we're excited to welcome Dr. Amanda Boyer. Amanda brings 18 years of serving students with disabilities, of leadership. She's been a childhood director, an early interventionist, behavior specialist, and comes to us with her doctorate from Southwest Baptist. Dr. Boyer, I introduced you there a little bit, but if you'd like to introduce yourself and what you're doing right now and what's been driving your work, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Yes, currently I am a process coordinator and I support early childhood through third grade. My experience has mainly been with students with disabilities in the mental health setting and early intervention, early childhood, and the K-12 system as well. I can truly say I've worked with kids from birth to 21 years old with disabilities.
Thank you. So every episode, we keep this the same. We like to have a focus. And while Dr. Boyer has many skills, one of the requests we get quite a bit is around co-teaching and, of course, behaviors. And so that's really going to be our focus today. So as we talk about co-teaching, Amanda, what separates great co-teaching from two adults in a room?
So I think that the biggest thing when you're talking about co-teaching versus just having, like you said, two adults in the room is their shared ownership and really looking at kids as all the kids are their kids. They're not my kids and your kids. Having alignment in how they, who teaches what, who responds how. Just there's got to be a lot of commonality and commitment. You really have to have co-teachers that want to co-teach. To get told that you're going to be a co-teacher isn't always maybe the best way to approach that, because they really have to believe in that system or that philosophy and be willing to do that.
It's good.
To me, as an observer of co-teaching, it was always interesting to observe the ones that did it well, because even the transitions were smooth. And if you were an outsider coming into the classroom, you couldn't determine who was like the lead teacher. I mean, there was just such the interaction of going back and forth. And I think that's so important that the students especially understand that these are both your teachers. You're getting the expertise of two individuals.
Yes, absolutely. And that's where that common planning time is so important, but intentional planning. It doesn't necessarily have to be an hour a day. I mean, just having just that 5 or 10 minutes for what's our goal, who's teaching what, who's going to take the data, who's going to check for understanding, who's going to respond to behavior, and just having those discussions up front to get started. And it's also really important for administrators to model that as well. Model that, like you said, that they're two teachers, they're both their teachers. And sometimes that is just as simple as the grade card having both people's names and introducing them that way. And you want to walk into that room and the students don't know which teacher is what, and the students also don't know who's on it, has an IEP, and who doesn't. I mean, that's when it's really strong, but it takes 1 to 3 years to really get to that point. I mean, the first year, especially when you think about at the high school level, which is where we in junior high, where we see a lot of co-teaching, because we want kids in tier 1 as much as possible. And in order to do that, this whole idea of co-teaching has come along. But as a special ed teacher, I don't have the content knowledge in science or math specifically. Those two would probably be very difficult. So you have to, for me personally, so you have to give the special ed teacher that year to really learn the content and learn from that teacher, but they have to be willing to do that, because you can get in a habit of, I'm kind of sitting back and learning from you, but that can't be the role I always have. And vice versa, the content teacher really learning from the special ed teacher, how they respond, how they have visual supports and chunking and those accommodations, learning how they respond to behavior, and then discussing and reflecting, like, we're going to make sure that we respond the exact same way. And it's just little step, just kind of step by step. And then usually by year 3, when you start walking through, they're in a groove and they've kind of figured it out.
So if you're an administrator in year 1 and they're struggling, and you go in and it looks like the special ed teacher is just like hovering over maybe the special ed students and offering them additional supports. What's your role as an administrator when you see that? What do you offer? How do you encourage? You talked about the common planning time, and I understand that, but they're going to need some coaching from the
Yes.
administrator. What's your advice for the administrator on how to coach that a little bit at a time?
I think it's spending some time and letting them see that it's important to you too, and that this is important work. So maybe as an administrator, I would want to sit down with that team, spend some time just going over, like, do we need to have some type of a system where this is how, like, this is step by step how we, decide who's going to do what, but also, like, we switch it up too. And I think just recognizing that, hey, I see that you're struggling, and I see that this is what it looks like to me. It looks like you're the teacher and you're the special ed teacher, and that's not the goal of co-teaching. So what do we need to do to kind of step back and try some new things? And that's why I think it's so important that you have people that actually want to do the co-teaching, and they understand that it's helps kids, because most people are doing just the best they can. And I think that's the important thing, is making sure that they understand you are there to support. And it may not be just this simple, like, hey, maybe it's going back to the models. There's 6 co-teaching models. Like, where are you comfortable at? Okay, so if you're comfortable here, then let's move along a little bit. Like for instance, one teach, one observe is kind of what you described. And I don't always, the models, I have to kind of look at my list of, what their names are, but there's one teach, one observe, and then there's one teach, one assist. And that's kind of what you see first year is the content teacher is teaching because they're having to teach. I mean, they can't just stop teaching science because they have a co-teacher now, and the other teacher kind of observes and takes the data and or maybe walks around and kind of assists and things like that. But you can't get stuck in that. Have to have some vulnerability to step out and say, okay, let's try some station teaching. If it's almost like that content, excuse me, expert is, as they're teaching those chunks of science content, they're teaching the adult too. There's no reason that that they couldn't have some stations where they rotate through. So you as the content expert are ensuring that they're getting the content, but they also have the special ed teacher able to practice some of that too. And vice versa. I know it's easy to think that it's the content that the special ed teacher needs to learn, but also as specialists, like we know how to accommodate. I mean, those things can come natural as special ed teachers, where to chunk, where to give a visual support, where to say, hey, it looks like everybody kind of, a few people need a break. Maybe we'll take you outside and go for a walk. I mean, there's lots of things that they just naturally do, but it doesn't have to be the special ed teacher that always does that. So I think sitting down and saying like, okay, this is kind of where we're at. What's one we could maybe practice or we could try, but without getting too far away from, it can't just be about adults. Like kids still have to learn. So I think there's that balance too.
Yeah, co-teaching is one of those things that a lot of people want to do because we know it works, but it's not always done well. And like with everything else that we want done well, we have to put that work into it. One of the things I see a lot of times is when it's not done well, and we hate for certain terms in education to get a bad name because we know when they're again done well, um, it's fantastic. But sometimes with co-teaching, we'll see the one expert teacher, and then we'll see the one really not doing as much. Well, then we have a really expensive para, is what we
Right.
have. Instead
Correct.
of two people being able to collaboratively partner with each other and meet the needs of these kids. So I think we have to be really careful about that and give that definition of what co-teaching and those expectations are. Dr. Boyer, as you think about co-teaching, you've had these conversations before. What would you say the biggest misconception either leaders or teachers have about co-teaching?
I think the big misconception is like just what you said, that they're just going to have an expensive para in their classroom.
Oh yeah, and then thus may not go through the piece. So
Right.
you've talked about it a little bit. If you were going to start somewhere,
Hmm.
uh, what is a major pitfall that you might avoid?
Avoid. Um, hmm, a major pitfall. I think that it comes to that support piece from the administrator, and also the ownership and responsibility that the teachers have. So I think check-ins, for one thing, it's a slippery slope. It, pitfall or slippery slope to get into, because that's the biggest thing is it ends up, one teacher teaching and another teacher walking around and kind of helping. And the kids know they figure that out. That one teacher's the real teacher, you'll hear. So I think it's, I wanted to support teachers by having, really committing to, okay, if these are my three co-teaching pairs, then frequent check-ins with them. How's everything going? Walkthroughs, looking for that shared ownership. If you can tell that they have my kids and your kids, and is there intentional roles as far as like, does everybody have a purpose, or do both of them really have a purpose? um and also, like, kids need to be engaged and have access to, but they need to have, all kids need to have access to the accommodations or the things that the special ed teacher can offer, but they also need to be engaged with both teachers, as well. So I think just frequent check-ins with your administrator, and just making sure that I think just having to kind of watch it start through the system, and through, because otherwise it's going to end up, you're in November and you do your first walkthrough and it's, you've got a para basically in the back of the room.
I want to go back because I think it ties a little bit into the pitfalls. You talked at the very beginning about the teachers have to want to a little bit.
Yes.
But as an administrator of a building or district, was there a personality trait, some things that you looked for in the lead teacher? And I say lead teacher, the content teacher. Were there things that you looked for that maybe you felt like, I think he or she has a better chance to be a co-teacher than their neighbor? And what would those traits be that you would seek out maybe before you said, hey, would you be interested in being a co-teacher?
Well, you can tell typically by who is eager to give kids accommodations, and who is eager to sit in on those IEP meetings, give the special ed teacher their input, understand that they are an important member of that IEP team. Like, you can tell those teachers that show up to those meetings, or if they can't show up because it's not, their time, it's not a time they can come, they're giving lots of input. They know that kid just as well as a special ed teacher, even, and those are the type of, flexibility and openness and those personalities. It seems like, it really is like it. We've kind of seen that the younger teachers have been more willing, but at the same time, like, there's some veteran teachers that have really rocked at co-teaching. So I think like you said, it's certain traits of flexibility and openness, and those people that are really bought into the focus being on learning and not the focus being on teaching.
I like that. And I really hadn't really thought about the engagement outside of the classroom, the traits, but yeah, I would think if they were engaged and knew those students and had a propensity to show care or be involved in the IEP meetings, that's good.
Dr. Boyer, you mentioned the check-ins, and man, as leaders, you get really busy. And if you're not
Right.
intentional about it,
Yep.
it is November. It's one of those things. And you walk in, you see different things. I think sometimes the other piece that happens when we don't check in, you might have an imbalance of power in content and in who delivers instruction and those pieces, but it could show up in different areas. And it seems like for successful co-teaching models and that partnership, one, they've worked out, how do we handle the things that we agree with, the things that we don't disagree with? How do we get to consensus? How do we make sure that partnership's there? Um, but if they don't, it's an understanding, if I'm a leader too, that sometimes I have to just go check in with them because I don't want a problem to fester for months, just like everything else with these guys. Like, oh, well, we could have fixed that, but
Right.
and it's in my experience, sometimes it's something small, like even who shows up to class. You got one that's an early person, you got one that's walking in with the kids. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's some of those partnerships. Yeah. So constant checks and understanding as administrators, sometimes the work for you is just to continue to um, foster that relationship, it seems like.
Yes. Yes. I would agree. And each pair is so different. That's why sometimes it's hard to give like strategies that are just going to make a big difference, because it really does depend on where are they at in their mindset about co-teaching. What's their relationship like with that co-teacher? Are they willing to be vulnerable and say, hey, like like my expertise is going to be more in the behavior management. So what I see a lot of times is something so simple is that teachers just talk kids to death. So I have to be comfortable, and the other teacher has to be vulnerable enough for me to say, listen, like when you responded to that kid, I mean, he just talked him to death, like maybe less words, where they're saying, hey, when you're teaching, science, like don't forget this big piece of, uh, photosynthesis or something. Like I think that there's has to be that vulnerability, and that comes with time and trust and communicating. But very much a communication piece is vital too.
I
Thank
want,
you.
oh, go ahead, Nathan.
No, I was going to ask another question, but yeah, if you want to build on that,
Yeah,
go
let,
ahead.
let me follow up that because that communication and stuff, I want to take this to a little different level because you worked with Nathan and I as special ed director. So now I'm going to change the communication question a little bit up and down the
Okay.
reporting chain. So let's say that you are special ed director listening today, and your superintendent has told you we need to do co-teaching, and maybe the principal is a little hesitant, or vice versa. You and the principal know that co-teaching is a great thing, but the superintendent maybe is not on board with co-teaching. How do you, as the special ed director, the process coordinator, kind of the middle between central office and the building administrator, how do you communicate that up and down and be a support as you try to roll out co-teaching, whether it be encouraged from the bottom up or the top down?
Good question. And I think that, I mean, for me, it's knowing your superintendent and knowing what kind of makes them tick. And with you, Miss Dr. Jim Cummins, it was finances. And and it was, how can this, quote unquote, give us the best bang for our buck? So to me, certified staff, and you and I always agreed on this, when you would allow me to have so many FTEs, you would always say, and that we agreed was, it's not perfect math, but two paras equals one teacher. And so I always tried to, and paras are great and have a hard job and are definitely vital, but turnover is very high. And, as special ed directors and principals, you find yourself, constantly rehiring in that process, where your certified staff typically is going to be, more stay longer, right? And they have so much knowledge that they're bringing. And so I think that for me, when we were rolling out co-teaching and kind of adjusting, it was more about, okay, so how can sort of, convince, like, that this is going to be better in the long run. I'm going to be able to eliminate some of pushing all these pairs in these classrooms where they really are truly acting as a pair because that's their job, and having more co-teaching partnerships where we can actually make it, it's going to be better for kids, but it's also financially responsible. I think that also, to add on to that, I mean, sometimes it's just about letting people see the research. And, when it comes to special ed, I mean, I just looked just yesterday actually at some new data, that at this point, like, kids with learning disabilities, so you take out, your other health impaired as much, and autism and things like that, but your children with learning disabilities are dropping out now 3 times, as their peers. I mean, that's unacceptable. Like, we have to do something to keep those kids engaged. And I think that, I mean, I think co-teaching is a good way to do that, because they're automatically in that tier 1 instruction, regardless if, they're not being pulled out and walk down the hallway. And, I mean, there's just so much wasted time when you do pull out. Even though that it works for some kids. I mean, you really have to think about each kid's needs, but um, yeah, I think it can really help keep kids on track.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm gonna add to that a little bit. And something that Dr. Boyer has said, and some of it's a little bit personal the benefit of co-teaching and pushing in and tier one, so many issues that we have. We have people working really, really hard, and yet the systems may have different challenges. And if anytime I'm asked what is something that I'm most proud of throughout my career, because I had these great people who were willing to dive in and do these things. There was uh, in two districts where we would start with students that had IEPs in at least the mid 20s, and one of them in the school building that we're in. And by the time we implemented a system where kids had access to tier one instruction
Mhm.
and a good RTI model, that we were able to drop those numbers below 10%. And I can't stress that enough. I'm telling you, this is, as we do the podcast and we do the learning, we've got a lot of experience because we were always willing to try something, which means sometimes we knocked it out of the park, and sometimes we had to do some learning, and but we were always willing to try. And one of those pieces was making sure that we put the right systems in place to ensure all kids had access to tier one instruction. Because the
Mhm.
other piece is our best intervention cannot be get the kids out of our class. So we
Correct.
have to rethink. We have an over diagnosis of kids with learning disabilities that have to be. Now, that means that we have to work with teachers on best practices. That means we have to work with them on best instruction. That means as leaders, we have to build systems but when we do those things, it's a beautiful thing for kids. And it's just like one of the benefits I think with co-teaching as well is it's a proactive approach when you've got those kids that you may think are on the bubble a little bit. And we're thinking, do we need to get this kid an IEP for some accommodations? And yet, when that co-teacher is in there, we're able to give them some extra support sometimes. Would you agree with that? I said a lot there. I'm sorry, but some of it is here's some philosophy and some pieces that we tend to believe in.
No, yeah, absolutely. I think that that's huge. And I think that that kind of, we've talked a little bit about how co-teaching can also improve or at least decrease some problem behavior. And I think that that kind of rolls right into when we're using those, we're using good systems, or oftentimes they're using good systems for academics, like by using the RTI model, and also, like you said, like ensuring that non-negotiables are like that they aren't, it can't ever be pulled out of tier one, which forces sometimes some push in, which I like. I like that. I think it should have to force some push in, and some different conversations. But a lot of times what we're hearing is, that statistic is kids with learning disabilities. But I mean, behavior problems are just running rampant. I mean, I always used to say, like, okay, you may have one or two kids per grade level, when I first started teaching, that had some pretty significant behaviors. And it seems like it's like almost one or two a classroom. I mean, a teacher can't not know how to help kids with problem behavior, because they're not going to probably not have an opportunity to not have a student in their classroom with some type of behavior problems. And that's a consistent issue in special education, because oftentimes it feels like the only help is special education.
Yeah, and I'm going to just piggyback Nathan's comments there, because for leaders out there, especially superintendents that are thinking, you know, first of all, you get paid extra money for students that are IEP students, and as an IEP, as a special ed director or somebody, you might think, well, as we cut these, we're cutting our program, we're going to lose teachers, we're going to, whatever the anti-thinking of reducing special ed numbers, I would encourage them to think about the students that are coming off of IEPs. What we're reducing there are the students that just needed supports to catch up. And so getting them in that tier one instruction, getting them back on track for, to your point about behavior, I think that shifts the ability to put more of your special ed money towards the behavior needs. So instead of trying to service 20% of your kids that are on an IEP, you get it below 10%, and now you can target more of that money towards your high needs, which cost more
Right.
to have those supports. So I don't think it's I think for those that would think that, well, we got to keep our numbers up for funding or to support the teaching staff, I think they need to rethink that a little bit.
Good point.
Well, uh, Dr. Boyer, you mentioned a couple different models, and hopefully we get to some behavior stuff. And just, I'll ask you this question about the models, but just make sure and cover anything that you really like, really want to put out there about co-teaching. But one of the things I wonder about, and I didn't understand this at first, is there are different models and approaches to co-teaching. Do you want to talk about a couple of those and when's the best time to use them?
Sure. So I kind of hit a little bit on the two models of one teach, one observe, and one teach, one assist. So that's kind of your beginning stages where one teach, one observe is just like it says. There's a teacher that teaches and one that observes and takes, usually is gathering data and kind of helping check for understanding. And then the one teach, one assist is one teacher teaching, but one teacher like moving around and actually kind of assisting kids, which is typically what you'll see early on. And then station teaching, I really like station teaching because it gives a chance, excuse me, for kids to have, maybe it's similar to like elementary centers, I guess. If you think about two teachers having small group instruction and there's maybe two other groups that are doing something independent. And I think when like right currently at the elementary that I'm working with, we kind of encouraged the special ed teacher to do some push in during small group stations, which is just kind of just playing around with the idea of co-teaching. We're not really calling it that, but it allows her to be pushed in during tier one instruction. Her and the teacher can pull small groups at the same time. She happens to be a very strong educator as well. So it's not just a specialist. So that in the elementary setting, specifically, that station can really work well. At the high school level, though, if you think about having kids, getting maybe from the content teacher, they get some small group to get like an extra, tier two, and then they move to the special ed teacher and maybe she checks again and they switch groups around. I mean, there's a lot of ways to really do that and allow the teacher and the kids to for the teachers to kind of feel out what they're doing and kind of test their knowledge as far as content and also just how they're responding to kids. And then the next one is parallel teaching, and this is where you just divide the class in two. So it would be, me on one side, you on the other side, and we're teaching the same thing to just a smaller group of kids, which does help your student staff ratio. But unless what I've heard teachers say is it's really difficult to do that unless you have a pretty large classroom because you're hearing each other, talk, or the kids are looking over at the other teacher because they're distracted, so the noise I think can sometimes hinder that model. The next one is alternative teaching, which is where one teacher kind of manages the classroom and the other teacher pulls small groups. So this might be after a lesson, they kind of have figured out which kids maybe need some reteaching. And so one teacher's like, I'm going to manage behavior, have them working busy, keeping busy. And then this teacher's kind of pulling kids and then pulling the next group of kids and things like that. So and that can be used at any level. And then team teaching is kind of like the most beautiful co-teaching where they're both just teaching, they're kind of working off each other. They have very, very much consistently know who's introducing the concept, who's modeling the concept, who's checking for understanding, who's responding to behavior. I mean, they just kind of do it together. And, I've also seen, also this depends on personality, but I've seen some pretty amazing co-teachers, kind of like stand-up comedians, like they kind of like work off each other and kind of, like Dr. Manley doesn't know anything about Edgar Allan Poe, so we're going to teach him today. And so he's kind of learning with the kids, and the kids get engaged and they kind of get into that. And then maybe the next lesson is about, you know, Babe Ruth, and you're like, well, Dr. Boyer doesn't know anything about Babe Ruth. I mean, there's so many things you can do when you have two adults that are willing to align and be, vulnerable and flexible. So those are the 6 models.
I appreciate you sharing that, and hearing you talk about the comedians or different things and those partnerships that work really well. Jim can talk about this. His wife and her co-teacher Laura, who are both LiftED associates as well, we'll have them on some point. But when you would watch them and the way they would feed off each other, now they did it for a while.
Right.
It was such a beautiful thing, and the other thing is like there was no downtime. Even if a teacher had something to do, like the amount of extra instruction in some of those when it works well that I would see was great. But Jim, I don't know, you've got
Yeah.
some experience in that as well.
Oh yeah, I mean it was always fun to watch him. And when you were talking about that last piece about them being able to joke and communicate, and I think that is truly the sign of a successful pair, is when they just kind of know what the other one needs to do at any
Mhm.
given time. And I think it's also a reminder that co-teaching doesn't have to necessarily just be co-teaching with reg ed and special ed, but co-teaching can be done with specialized content knowledge. And in Renee and Laura's case, Laura's expertise was ELA and Renee's expertise was math. And so for elementary students to have lower elementary students to have a math specialist and an ELA specialist teaching all the time. And you talk about classroom management. I mean, the kids did not get off task, because while one was teaching, the other one was monitoring behavior, and it
Mhm.
did not take long for correction to occur. So
Yes,
um,
absolutely.
but like Nathan said, when you've got two that teach together and are good at it, it's all, I mean, it's almost like a piece of art, because
Yes.
it just happens. It's not forced, and it just works. So yeah, good
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
So we've
That's why
talked.
I think, oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I
Go
was just
ahead.
saying, I think that's a huge point to remember, that it may be year 3 before you really see this beautifully work of art. I think that we get impatient, and I get that, or we decide in August that we have all these kids coming from the junior high, for example, that have co-teaching minutes, and now we got to throw together some co-teaching. Like, we have to be better as administrators to be more intentional about who's going to co-teach, when they're going to have time, all of the things to help set them up for success as much as possible, and know that there's expectations that are different in year 1 than they are in year 3.
So we've talked quite a bit about co-teaching, and we said we were going to get to the behavior piece, but I almost think we probably ought to bring Dr. Boyer back in to specifically talk about some behavior pieces. And yet, I would say, Doc, there's a lot of, whether it's co-teaching or what would be something right now that when you think about behavior, you would want our leaders specifically to maybe think about in co-teaching. And I remember what I was going to say too. It sounds like when you talk about the 3-year commitment, when you start into this process, by the way, understanding that it is a process and a journey. It's not a quick fix. And so I love what you said about the 3-year piece and that mindset that administrators are going to have. So, all right, back it up because I went on a journey there. Um, let's wrap this up with any thoughts you have on behavior right now and what people are seeing and some things. And then if you're up to it, we'll bring you back and we'll get a little bit deeper into the behavior piece.
I think the big thing, mindset wise, is forcing yourself to look at behavior the same way you look at academics. And There's a lot of ways to do that. The way that I think is the simplest and the most visual is to, take data on, typically it's how many kids are going to the like recovery space or the recovery room, or doesn't really matter if you use PBIS or BIST or what, or if you make your own. There has to be that school-wide behavior system. There's got to be something that we all are committed to: language, responses, reinforcement, everything, and then taking data on um, who's visiting those spaces and putting it in your RTI triangle, like your academic RTI triangle. And just like academics, if your tier 2 is too fat, you got a tier 1 problem. And sometimes that's just the best way to start, is to say, okay, whatever data we're taking right now, good or bad, let's just get something down to see that, okay, I'm almost guarantee if people are having a lot of behaviors being pulled out of classrooms and down to a focus or recovery space, I can almost guarantee there's a tier 1 problem, and they need to just go back to being committed to those school-wide things. So I'd say that would be like my first step, was either tightening up your tier 1 without looking at data, or trying to get, put your data in some type of an RTI triangle.
No, I love that. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
and I want to just thank Dr. Boyer for it. Came in at a time when we were, she mentioned I was a little bit focused on finance, but uh, Nathan would tell me, hey, we're not we're spending some money in special ed, and you came in and got our spending under control. But what I would say is you advocated for what was right for kids, what was right for your staff, what was needed to do it the right way. And I always appreciated that. And I would say that to a leader that's working with the superintendent. Um, you come in with the passion that the superintendent understands, you're going to have their attention. Now, we couldn't do everything that you wanted, but I think when the leader is doing the right work, has their heart in the right place, and you can hear it through the discussions today that you absolutely did. And so certainly thankful for the work that you did there. And just it's another point that you don't have to be the superintendent to be a leader in a district. You can lead at every position. And I think Dr. Boyer did that in our case.
Well, thank you. That means a lot, Dr. Cummins. I appreciate that. And you always were easy because you care a lot about kids. So you're you're pretty easy to twist your arm.
Well,
And if you could bring up a
don't let anybody
spreadsheet,
know that.
if you could bring him a spreadsheet,
Right.
that
Yeah.
was extra
Yep.
icing on the
Yep.
cake.
Yep. A spreadsheet
Uh,
and some financial, anything that was, yeah. And Dr. Cummins, I just always loved you because you're a girl dad, I think
yes,
as a female
that's right.
leader,
Definitely a girl dad.
I appreciated that.
Uh, Dr. Manley wouldn't know anything about that, would
I
he?
know.
He
No,
says,
no, I've not been blessed in that way as well. I would want to piggyback on the spreadsheet, because that was always great. But what I always appreciate about Dr. Cummins, as well as even when you were having those conversations, there was a thought process that you were going to go through, so you knew it inside and out by the time you got it to that spreadsheet level. And so
Yes.
it wasn't just here's the spreadsheet. There was the thinking behind it. So,
oh my
Yes, for sure.
goodness.
Jim, you want to wrap us up?
You bet. Well, just appreciate you being on with us. Appreciate the work that you do and you're gonna do for leaders out there that are looking for co-teaching support, even behavior. And we'll get you, like Nathan said, we'll get you back on here to talk about um, just the things that we encountered, a lot of
Mhm.
behavior issues from
Mhm.
just classroom disruptions to, I remember a student that we had a hallway in one of our buildings that was dedicated to that student and
Yeah.
and 5 or 6 adults. So the behavior gamut is large, and we would love to have you back on to talk about that. So we really appreciate that. So if your district is interested in support around co-teaching implementation, inclusive practices, walkthrough tools, behavior systems, Nathan and I would be happy to visit with you how LiftED could partner in that work. We're here to support schools. That's what we do. And like Amanda mentioned, 3 years it takes to get some co-teaching in place. Nathan and I's philosophy is whatever you're going to do, it has to be sustained, and that's our coaching model is to coach over time, to really make sure something's implemented and supported. So if you need us, you know where to find us. And until next time, be well and keep leading with purpose beyond the bell.